My name is Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. Today we will discuss stalkers. Stalkers are not made of one cloth. Some of them are psychopaths. Other stalkers are schizoids, narcissists, paranoids, or an admixture of these unsavory mental health disorders. Stalkers harass their victims because they are lonely, or because it is fun. These are latent sadists. Or because they cannot help it. They are clinging, codependent, or for myriad different other reasons. Clearly, coping techniques suited to one type of stalker may backfire or prove to be futile with another. The only denominator common to all bullying stalkers is their pent-up rage. The stalker is angry at his or her targets and hates them. He perceives his victims as unnecessarily and churlishly frustrating. The aim of stalking is to educate the victim and to punish her. Hence, the catch-22 of coping with stalkers. The standard and good advice is to avoid all contact with your stalker, to ignore him, even as you take precautions. But being evaded only inflames the stalker's wrath and enhances his frustration. The more the stalker feels sidelined, ignored, and stonewalled, the more persistent he becomes, the more intrusive, and the more aggressive. So what to do? It is essential, therefore, to first identify the type of abuser you're faced with. Start with the erotomaniac. This kind of stalker believes that he is in love with you, and that regardless of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the feeling is reciprocated. In other words, he believes that you are in love with him. He interprets everything you do or refrain from doing as coded messages confessing your eternal devotion to him and to your relationships. Erotomaniacs are lonely, socially inept people. They may also be people with whom you have been involved romantically, your former spouse, a former boyfriend, or even a one-night stand. They could also be colleagues or co-workers. The best coping strategy with an erotomaniac is to ignore him. Do not communicate with him, or even acknowledge his existence. The erotomaniac clutches at straws and often suffers from ideas of reference. He tends to blow out of proportion every comment or gesture of his loved one. So avoid contact. Do not talk to him. Return his gifts unopened. Refuse to discuss with him anything or discuss him with others. Delete his correspondence. Then there is a narcissistic stalker. He feels entitled to your time, attention, admiration, and resources. He interprets every rejection as an act of aggression, which leads to a narcissistic injury. He reacts with sustained rage and vindictiveness. He can turn violent because he feels omnipotent and immune to the consequences of his actions. Your best coping strategy with a narcissistic stalker is to make clear that you want no further contact with him and that this decision is not personal. Be firm. Do not hesitate to inform him that you hold him responsible for his stalking, bullying, and harassment, and that you will take all necessary steps to protect yourself. Narcissists at base are cowards and are easily intimidated. Luckily, they never get emotionally attached to their prey, and so they can move on with relative ease. Then there is the paranoid stalker. This is by far the most dangerous of the lot. He lives in an inaccessible world of his own making. He cannot be reasoned with. He cannot be cajoled. He thrives on threats, anxiety, and fear. He distorts every communication to feed his persecutory delusion and enhance his anxiety. The paranoid's conduct is unpredictable, and there is no typical scenario. But experience shows that you can minimize the danger to yourself and to your household by taking some basic steps. If at all possible, put as much physical distance as you can between yourself and the paranoid stalker. Change address, phone number, email account, cell phone number, enlist the kids in a new, different school. Find a new job, get a new credit card, open a new bank account, move states if you have to. Do not inform your paranoid ex about your whereabouts and about your new life. You may have to make painful sacrifices, such as minimize contacts, even with your family and best friends. And even with all these precautions, your abusive ex is likely to find you, furious that you have fled and evaded him, raging at your newfound existence, suspicious and resentful of your freedom and personal autonomy. Violence is more than likely to ensue. Unless deterred, paranoid former spouses tend to be harmful, even, in some cases, lethal. So be prepared. Alert your local law enforcement officers. Check out your neighborhood domestic violence shelter. Consider owning a gun for self-defense, or at the very least, a stun gun or mustard spray. Carry these with you at all times. Keep them close by and accessible, even when you're asleep or in your bathroom. Erotomaniac stalking can last many years. Do not let down your guard, even if you haven't heard from him for a while. Stalkers leave traces. They tend, for instance, to scout the territory before they make their move. A typical stalker invades his or her victim's privacy a few times long before the crucial and injurious encounter. So, is your computer being tampered with? Is someone downloading your email? Has anyone been in your house while you were away? Any signs of breaking and entering, missing things, atypical disorder, or even too much order? Is your post being delivered erratically, some of the envelopes having been opened and then resealed? Mysterious phone calls abruptly disconnected when you pick up. Your stalker may scout your home, sitting in a vehicle opposite your doorstep. So, if some of these signs exist, your stalker must have dropped by and is monitoring you. Notice any unusual pattern, any strange event, any weird occurrence. Someone is driving by your house morning and evening. A new gardener or maintenance man came by in your absence. Someone is making inquiries about you and your family. Maybe it's time to move on. Teach your children to avoid your paranoid ex and to report to you immediately any contact he has made with them. Abusive bullies often strike where it hurts most, at one's children. Explain to your children the danger without being unduly alarming. Make a distinction between adults whom they can trust and your abusive former spouse or ex whom they should avoid. Ignore your gut reactions and impulses because they are often misleading. Sometimes the stress is so onerous and so infuriating that you feel like striking back at the stalker. So don't do it. Don't play his game. He is better at it than you are and is likely to defeat you. Instead, unleash the full force of the law whenever you get the chance to do so. Restraining orders, peace bonds, spells in jail, and frequent visits from the police tend to check the abuser's violent and intrusive conduct. The other behavioral extreme is equally futile and counterproductive. Do not try to buy peace by appeasing your abuser. Submissiveness and attempts to reason with him only whet the stalker's appetite. He regards both as contemptible weaknesses, vulnerabilities that he can exploit. You cannot communicate with a paranoid because he is likely to distort everything that you say to support his persecutory delusions. He has a sense of entitlement. He has grandiose fantasies. You cannot appeal to his emotions or reason. He has none. He has at least no positive emotions. Remember, your abusive and paranoid former partner blames it all on you. As far as he is concerned, you, recklessly and unscrupulously, wrecked a wonderful thing that you both had going. He is vengeful, seething, and prone to bouts of uncontrolled and extreme aggression. Don't listen to those who tell you to take it easy. Hundreds of thousands of women paid with their lives for heeding this idiotic advice. Do not take it easy. Do not calm down. Do be hypervigilant. Your paranoid stalker is inordinately dangerous, and more likely than not, he is with you for a long time to come. Finally, there is the antisocial or psychopathic stalker. Though ruthless and typically violent, the psychopath is a calculating machine, out to maximize his gratification and personal profit. Psychopaths lack empathy and may even be sadistic, but understand well and instantly the language of carrots and sticks. So your best coping strategy is to convince your psychopath that messing with your life or with your nearest is going to cost him dearly. Do not threaten him. Simply be unequivocal about your desire to be left in peace and your intentions to involve the law should he stalk, harass or threaten you. Give him a choice between being left alone and becoming the target or becoming the target of multiple arrests, restraining orders and worse. Take extreme precautions at all times and meet him only in public places. My name is Sam Wagner. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. Stalking is a crime, and stalkers are criminals. This simple truth is often ignored by mental health practitioners, by law enforcement agencies, and by the media. The horrid consequences of stalking are typically underestimated, and stalkers are mocked as eccentric and lonely weirdos. Yet stalking affects 1/5 of all women and an unknown number of men, and often ends in violence and bloodshed. A 1997 review paper titled Stalking: An Overview of the Problem, written by Karen Abrams, Gail Patrick Robinson, defines stalking this way. Stalking, or criminal harassment, is defined as the willful, malicious, and repeated following or harassing of another person, usually requiring a credible threat of violence against the victim or the victim's family. Harass refers to willful conduct directed at a person that seriously alarms, annoys, or distresses the person, and which serves no legitimate purpose. Typically, the behavior involves such things as loitering near the victim, approaching, making multiple phone calls, constantly surveying, harassing the victim's employer or children, harming a pet, interfering with personal property, sabotaging dates, and sending threatening or sexually suggestive gifts or letters. Harassment usually escalates, often beginning with phone calls that gradually become more threatening and aggressive in nature, and frequently ends in violent acts. In essence, the offender's behavior is terrorizing, intimidating, and threatening, and restricts the freedom and controls the victim. In the United States, continues the authors, there are individual state laws, but no unified federal anti-stalking laws. Under the Criminal Code of Canada, it is a crime to knowingly or recklessly harass another person in any of the following ways: by repeatedly following or communicating either directly or indirectly with that person or anyone known to them, by watching where that person or anyone known to them resides, works, or happens to be, and by engaging in any threatening conduct directed at that person or his or her family, if any of these cause the person to reasonably fear for his or her safety. In both the United States and Canada, anti-stalking laws are in a state of flux. Many criminals, and therefore many stalkers, suffer from personality disorders, most prevalently the antisocial personality disorder, formerly known as psychopathy. Comorbidity, a cocktail of mental health disorders, is very frequent among stalkers. Most stalkers abuse substances such as alcohol or drugs, and they are prone to violence or to other forms of aggression. Antisocial personality disorder was formerly called psychopathy, or more colloquially, sociopathy. Some scholars, such as Robert Hare, still distinguish psychopathy from mere antisocial behavior. The disorder appears in early adolescence, but criminal behavior and substance abuse often abate with age, usually by the 4th or 5th decade of life. Antisocial personality disorder may have genetic or hereditary determinants and afflicts mainly men. Brain activity is different in psychopaths than in the average normal population. The diagnosis is controversial and regarded by some scholars as scientifically unfounded or culturally bound. Psychopaths regard other people as objects to be manipulated, and instruments of gratification and utility. They have no discernible conscience. They are devoid of empathy. They find it difficult to perceive other people's non-verbal cues, needs, emotions, and preferences. Consequently, the psychopath rejects other people's rights and his commensurate obligations to them. The psychopath is impulsive, reckless, irresponsible, and unable to postpone gratification. He often rationalizes his behavior, showing an utter absence of remorse for hurting or defrauding others. The psychopath's primitive defense mechanisms include splitting. They view the world and people in it as either all good or all evil. Projection. They attribute their own shortcomings to others. And projective identification. They force others to behave the way they expect them to. The psychopath fails to comply with social norms, hence the criminal acts, the deceitfulness and identity theft, the use of aliases, the constant lying, the conning of even his nearest and dearest for gain or pleasure. Psychopaths are unreliable. They do not honor their undertakings, obligations, contracts, and responsibilities. They rarely hold a job for long. They almost never repay their debts. They are vindictive, remorseless, ruthless, driven, dangerous, aggressive, violent, irritable, and sometimes prone to magical thinking. They seldom plan for the long and medium terms, believing themselves to be immune to the consequences of their own actions. Many psychopaths are outright bullies. Michigan psychologist Donald B. Saunders distinguishes between three types of aggressors: family only, generally violent, most likely to suffer from antisocial personality disorder, and emotionally volatile. In an interview he granted to Psychology Today, Saunders described the generally violent type this way. Type 2 men, generally violent, use violence outside the home as well as in it. Their violence is severe and tied to alcohol. They have high rates of arrest for drunk driving and violence. Most have been abused as children and have rigid attitudes about sex roles. These men, Saunders explains, are calculating. They have a history with the criminal justice system, and they know what they can get away with. Bullies feel inadequate, and they compensate for it by being violent, verbally, psychologically, or physically. Some bullies suffer from personality and other mental health disorders. They feel entitled to special treatment. They seek attention. They lack empathy. They are rageful and envious. They exploit and then discard their co-workers or other people, friends, family members. Bullies are insincere. They are haughty, unreliable, and they lack empathy and sensitivity to the emotions, needs, and preferences of others, whom they regard and treat as mere objects or instruments of gratification. Bullies are ruthless, cold, and have alloplastic defenses and an outside locus of control. In other words, they blame others for their failures, defeats, or misfortunes. Bullies have low frustration and tolerance thresholds. They get bored and anxious easily. They are violently impatient, emotionally labil, unstable, erratic, and untrustworthy. They lack self-discipline. They are egotistic, exploitative, rapacious, opportunistic, driven, reckless, and callous. Bullies are emotionally immature, and they are control freaks. They are consummate liars and deceivingly charming. Bullies dress, talk, and behave normally. Many of them are persuasive, manipulative, or even charismatic. They are socially adept, liked, and often fun to be around and the center of attention. Only a prolonged and intensive interaction with a bully, sometimes as a victim, exposes his or her dysfunction. Though ruthless, typically violent, the psychopath is a calculating machine, out to maximize his gratification and personal profit. Psychopaths lack empathy and may even be sadistic, but they understand well and instantly the language of carrots and sticks. So what is the best coping strategy? Convince your psychopath that messing with your life or with your nearest is going to cost him dearly. Do not threaten him. Simply be unequivocal and firm about your desire to be left in peace and alone, and your intentions to involve the law should he stalk, harass, or threaten you. Give him the choice between being left alone and becoming the target of multiple arrests, restraining orders, or worse. Take extreme precautions at all times. Meet him accompanied by someone and only in public places. And only if you have no other choice. Minimize contact and interact with him through professionals, via your lawyers, accountants, therapists, police officers, judges, evaluators. Document every contact, every conversation. Try to commit everything to paper. You may need it as evidence. Tape your phone calls with him, your conversations with him. Educate your children to be on their guard and to exercise caution and good judgment with regards to him. Keep fully posted and update and inform your local law enforcement agencies, your friends, the media, and anyone else who would listen. Be careful with your personal information. Provide only the bare and necessary minimum to anyone who asks. Remember, he has ways of finding out everything about you, especially in the computer age. Under no circumstances, succumb to his romantic advances, accept his gifts, respond to personal communications, show interest in his affairs, help him out, gossip about him or with him, send him messages directly or through third parties. Do none of these things. Maintain the no contact rule. Equally, do not seek revenge. Do not provoke him, punish him, taunt him, disparage him, badmouth or gossip about him or your relationship. Remember, psychopaths are vindictive and dangerous. My name is Sam Vaknin. I am the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. Abuse by proxy continues long after the relationship is officially over, at least as far as one of the parties is concerned. The majority of abusers get the message, however belatedly and reluctantly. Yet there is a minority of abusers, the more vindictive and obsessed ones, who continue to haunt and hunt their ex-spouses for years to come. These are, of course, the stalkers. Most stalkers are what the scholars Zona and Gerberth call simple obsessional, or, as Mullen and Path put it, the rejected ones. They stalk their prey as a way of maintaining the dissolved relationship, at least in their diseased minds. They seek to punish their quarry for refusing to collaborate in the charade and for resisting their unwanted and ominous intentions. Many of them are erotomaniac. Such stalkers come from all walks of life and cut across social, racial, gender, and cultural barriers. They usually suffer from one or more comorbid personality disorders. They may have anger management or emotional issues, and they usually abuse drugs or alcohol or both. Stalkers are typically lonely, violent, and intermittently unemployed, but they are rarely full-fledged criminals. Contrary to myths perpetrated by the mass media, studies show that most stalkers are men. They have high IQs, advanced degrees, and they are middle-aged. This has been proven in studies such as Malloy and Gothard, 1995, and Morrison in 2001. Rejected stalkers are intrusive and inordinately persistent. They recognize no boundaries, personal or legal. They honor no contracts, and they pursue their targets for years. They interpret rejection as a sign of the victim's continued interest and obsession with them. They are therefore impossible to get rid of. Many of them are narcissists, and thus lack empathy, feel omnipotent and immune to the consequences of their actions, and suffer from serious cognitive deficits and a deteriorating reality test. Even so, some stalkers are possessed of an uncanny ability to psychologically penetrate other people. Often, this gift, which I call cold empathy, is abused and put at the service of their control freakery and sadism. Stalking and the ability to mete out justice makes them feel omnipotent, powerful, and vindicated. When arrested, they often act the victim and attribute their actions to self-defense and to what they call righting wrongs. Stalkers are emotionally labil and present with rigid and infantile primitive defense mechanisms: splitting, projection, projective identification, denial, intellectualization, and narcissism. These type of stalkers devalue and dehumanize their victims, and thus justify the harassment or diminish it. From here, it is only one step to violent conduct. I'm Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. Your abusive ex is likely to cope with the pain and humiliation of separation by spreading lies, distortions, and half-truths about you, and by preferring self-justifying interpretations of the events leading to the breakup. By targeting your closest, nearest, and dearest, family, your children, boss, colleagues, co-workers, neighbors, and friends, your ex hopes to achieve two equally unrealistic goals. The first one is to isolate you socially and to force you to come running back into his waiting and loving arms. The second goal is to communicate to you that he still loves you, is still interested in you and your affairs, and that no matter what, you are inseparable. He magnanimously is willing to forgive all the horrible things you did to him and to revive the relationship, which after all had its good moments. All abusers present with rigid and infantile, primitive defense mechanisms: splitting, rejection, projective identification, denial, intellectualization, and narcissism. We will discuss each of these defense mechanisms in future videos. But some abusers go further. They decompensate by resorting to self-delusion. Unable to face the dismal failures that they are, they partially withdraw from reality. So, how should you cope with a delusional, paranoid, and therefore very dangerous stalker? It may be difficult, but the first thing is turn off your emotions. Abusers prey on other people's empathy, pity, altruism, mercy, nostalgia, and tendency to lend a helping hand. Some stalkers punish themselves, drink to excess, commit offenses and get caught, abuse drugs, have accidents, fall prey to scams, or entertain suicidal ideation. They do all these self-destructive and self-defeating acts in order to force their victims to pity them and to get in touch with them. The only viable coping strategy is to ignore your abusive ex. Take all necessary precautions to protect yourself and your family. Alert law enforcement agencies to any misbehavior, violence, or harassment on his part. File charges and have restraining orders issued, but otherwise avoid all gratuitous interactions. Here is a short list. Be sure to maintain as much contact with your abuser as the courts, counselors, mediators, guardians, or law enforcement officials mandate, but only as much as they mandate. Do not contravene the decisions of the system. Work from inside the system to change the judgments, evaluations, or rulings, but never rebel against them. Never ignore them. You will only turn the system against you and against your interests. Still, with the exception of the minimum mandated by the courts, decline any and all gratuitous, unnecessary contact with the narcissistic or psychopathic abuser and stalker. Do not respond to his pleading, romantic, nostalgic, flattering, or threatening email messages. Return all gifts he sends you. Refuse him entry to your premises. Do not even respond to the intercom. Do not talk to him on the phone. Hang up the minute you hear his voice, while making clear to him in a single, polite, but firm sentence that you are determined not to talk to him. Do not answer his letters. Do not visit him on special occasions or in emergencies. Do not respond to questions, requests, or pleas forwarded to you through or via third parties. Disconnect from third parties whom you know are spying on you at his behest. Do not discuss with him your children. Do not gossip about him. Do not ask him for anything, even if you are in dire need or dire straits. When you are forced to meet him, do not discuss your personal affairs and do not discuss his personal affairs with him. Relegate any inevitable contact with him, when and where possible, to professionals. Use your lawyer, use your accountant. Avoid him. Do not collude or collaborate in your ex's fantasies and delusions. You cannot buy his mercy or his goodwill He has none. Do not support his notions, even indirectly, that he is brilliant, perfect, irresistibly handsome, destined for great things, entitled, powerful, wealthy, the center of attention, etc. Abusers act on these misperceptions, and they try to coerce you into becoming an integral part of their charades. It's called shared psychosis, or folie à deux. Abuse is a criminal offense. By definition, abusers are criminals. They lack empathy. They lack compassion. They have deficient social skills. They disregard laws, norms, contracts, and morals. You can't negotiate with your abusive ex. You cannot strike a bargain with him. You cannot reform him, cure him, or recondition him. He is a threat to you, to your property, and to your dear ones. Treat him as a threat. The most dangerous class of abusers is the paranoid delusional. If your ex is one of these, he is likely to believe that you still love him. It's called erotomania. He will interpret everything you do or say, even to third parties, as hidden messages addressed to him and professing your undying devotion. He will also confuse the physical with the emotional. He will regard sex as proof of love and be prone to rape you. He will blame the failure of the relationship on you or on others, social workers, your friends, your family, your children. He will never assume responsibility. He will seek to remove the obstacles to a happy and long relationship, sometimes by resorting to violence, kidnapping, or murdering the sources of his frustration. He will be very envious of your newfound autonomy, and he will try to sabotage it. He will reassert his control over you. For instance, he will break and enter into your house. He will leave intrusive messages on your answering machine. He will follow you around. He will appear suddenly in your workplace, and he will stay outside in a stationary car observing your home. He will try to harm you, sometimes himself, in a fit of indignation. He will try to punish you if he feels that no renewed relationship is possible. He will develop persecutory delusions. He will perceive slights and insults where none are intended. He will become convinced that he is the center of a conspiracy to deny him and you happiness, to humiliate him, to punish him, to delude him, to impoverish him, to confine him physically or intellectually, to censor him, to impose on his time, to force him to action or to inaction, to frighten him, to coerce him, to surround and besiege him, to change his mind, to part with his values, to victimize, or even to murder him. These are all persecutory delusions. The paranoid's conduct is unpredictable, and there is no typical scenario. But experience shows that you can minimize the danger to yourself and to your household by taking some simple steps. We will discuss these steps in a future video. Stay tuned. My name is Sam Berkeley. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. The erotomaniac is the kind of stalker who believes that he is in love with you. To show his keen interest, he keeps calling you. To prove his devotion, he keeps dropping by, writing emails, doing unsolicited errands on your behalf, talking to your friends, co-workers, and family behind your back, and in general, making himself available at all times. The erotomaniac feels free to make for you legal, financial, and emotional decisions, and to commit you even without your express consent or knowledge. The erotomaniac intrudes on your privacy, does not respect your express wishes and your personal boundaries. He ignores your emotions, needs, and preferences. To him, love means enmeshment and clinging, coupled with an overpowering separation anxiety, fear of abandonment. The erotomaniac, in extreme cases, may even force himself on you sexually. The problem with erotomaniacs is that no amount of denials, chastising, threats, or even outright hostile actions convince the erotomaniac that you are not in love with him. He knows better, and he will make you see the light as well. You are simply unaware of what is good for you, says the erotomaniac. You are divorced from your own emotions, he insists. You are in love, you just don't know it. The erotomaniac determinedly sees it as his or her task to bring life and happiness into your otherwise dreary existence. Thus, regardless of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, the erotomaniac is convinced that his feelings are being reciprocated. In other words, that you are equally in love with him as he claims to be with you. The erotomaniac stalker interprets everything you do, and even things you refrain from doing, as coded messages. These messages convey to him a confession of your eternal devotion to him and to your relationship. Erotomaniacs are socially inept, awkward, schizoid, and suffer from a host of mood and anxiety disorders. There may also be people with whom you have been involved romantically, your former spouse, former boyfriend, a one-night stand. They may be colleagues or co-workers or people you have been involved with otherwise. They are driven, erotomaniacs, by their all-consuming loneliness and all-pervading fantasies. Consequently, erotomaniacs react badly to any perceived rejection by their victims. They turn on a dime and become dangerously vindictive, out to destroy the source of their mounting frustration and agony, you. When the relationship looks hopeless, many erotomaniacs turn to violence in a spree of self and other destruction. What is the best coping strategy? Well, erotomaniacs are not easy to handle. They're very persistent. They are a long-term nuisance. Your best tactic would be to ignore the erotomaniac. Do not communicate with him, or even acknowledge his existence. The erotomaniac clutches at straws and often suffers from ideas of reference. He tends to blow out of proportion every comment or gesture of his loved one. Follow these behavioral tips, the no contact policy. 1. With the exception of the minimum mandated by the courts, decline any and all gratuitous contact with your stalker. Number 2. Do not respond to his pleading, romantic, nostalgic, flattering or threatening email messages or other communications. Number 3. Return unopened all gifts he sends you. Number 4. Refuse him entry to your premises. Do not even respond to the intercom. Number 5. Do not talk to your erotomaniac stalker on the phone. Hang up the minute you hear his voice, while making clear to him in a single, polite but firm sentence that you are determined not to talk to him. Do not answer his letters. Do not visit him on special occasions or in emergencies. Do not respond to questions, requests or pleas forwarded to you through third parties. Disconnect from third parties whom you know are spying on you at the erotomaniac stalker's behest. Do not discuss him with your children. Do not gossip about him with others. Do not ask him for anything, even if you are in dire need. When you are forced to meet him, do not discuss your personal affairs with him, or his personal affairs. Avoid intimacy, or any hint of intimacy. Relegate any inevitable contact with him, when and where possible, to professionals, your lawyer, your accountant. Any contact with the erotomaniac stalker is interpreted by him as an incontrovertible, indisputable, unambiguous, and unequivocal sign of your overpowering love for him. Avoid him, and you avoid serious potential danger. I'm Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. You're a victim of abuse. You're being mistreated, repeatedly and frequently. Your health is in danger, maybe your life. What to do? Well, your first fallback option is your family,
They are, in many cases, though by no means always, your natural allies. They can provide you with shelter, money, emotional support, and advice. Don't hesitate to call on them in times of need. Your friends, and to a lesser extent your colleagues and neighbors, will usually lend you a sympathetic ear and will provide you with useful tips. Merely talking to them can not only ease the burden, but protect you from future abuse. This is because stalkers and paranoids thrive on secrecy, and they abhor public exposure. They fear it. Regrettably, resorting to the legal system, your next logical step, is bound to be a disappointing, disempowering, and invalidating experience. Watch my video titled Pathologizing the Victim. In a 1997 review paper titled Stalking Victims' Problems with the Legal System and Therapeutic Considerations, Karen Abrams, MD, wrote, "Law enforcement insensitivity toward domestic violence has already been well documented. Police often feel that, as opposed to serious crimes such as murder, domestic issues are not an appropriate police responsibility. Private misconduct should not be subject to public intervention, and because few cases result in successful prosecution, pursuing domestic violence complaints is ultimately futile. This sense of futility, reinforced by the media and the courts, may be transmitted to the victim. In cases involving ex-lovers," continues Karen Abrams in her article, "the police may have equal difficulty in being sympathetic to the issues involved. As in the case of Mrs. A, society often views stalking as a normal infatuation that will eventually resolve itself, or as the action of a rejected lover or lovesick individual, more to be empathized with than censured. Victims often report feeling that the police and society blame them for provoking harassment or for making poor choices in relationships. Authorities may have particular difficulty in understanding the woman who continues to have ambivalent feelings towards the offender. In terms of the laws themselves, there is a history of ineffectiveness in dealing with crimes of stalking. The nature of the offenses themselves makes investigations and prosecution difficult because surveillance and phone calls often have no witnesses. Barriers to victims using civil actions against stalkers include dangerous time delays and financial requirements. Temporary restraining orders, or peace bonds, have been used most commonly and are generally ineffective, partly because law enforcement agencies have limited resources to enforce such measures. Even if caught, violators receive at most minimal jail time or minor monetary penalties. Sometimes the offender just waits out the short duration of the order. Persistent, obsessed stalkers are usually not deterred. Still, with all these caveats, it is crucial that you document the abuse and stalking and duly report them to the police and to your building security. If your stalker is in jail, you should report him to the wardens and to his parole officer. It is important to resort to the courts in order to obtain restraining or cease and desist orders. Keep law enforcement officers and agencies fully posted. Don't hesitate to call upon them as often as you need to. They are public servants. It is their job. Hire a security expert if the threat is credible or imminent. You are well advised to rely on professional advice throughout your prolonged and arduous disentanglement from your paranoid and stalking ex. Use attorneys, accountants, private detectives, and therapists to communicate with him. Consult your lawyer, or if you can't afford one, apply for a pro bono lawyer provided by a civic association or your state's legal aid. Ask your attorney, what are your rights? What kinds of legal redress you have? What safety precautions you should adopt? And what are the do's and don't do's of your situation? Especially important is to choose the right therapist for you and for the children. Check whether the therapist has any experience with victims of stalking and with the emotional effects of constant threat and surveillance, with fear, humiliation, ambivalence, helplessness, and paranoid ideation. Stalking is a traumatic process, and you may need intervention to ameliorate the post-traumatic effects it wreaks on the victim. Join online and offline groups and organizations for victims of abuse and stalking. Peer support is critical. Helping others and sharing experiences and fears with other victims is a validating and empowering as well as a useful experience. Realizing that you're not alone, you're not crazy, that the whole situation is not your fault, helps to restore your shattered self-esteem and puts things in perspective. Social services in your area are geared to deal with battering and stalking. They likely run shelters for victims of domestic violence and abuse, for instance. Watch the entire series of 40 videos about these topics. Domestic violence shelters, courts, the police, your getaway, your relationship with the abuser, or with your spouse, after the divorce, and so on. I wish you luck. I'm Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. My frequent advice to victims of abuse is run for your life, flee to the hills, detach, no contact, go away, escape. But do not leave unprepared. Study and execute every detail of your getaway. This is especially important if your partner is violent and paranoid. Be sure to make a safety plan, how to get out of the house unnoticed, and the indispensable minimum items that you should carry with you, even on a short notice. Here are the recommendations of the province of Alberta in Canada. Long before you actually leave, copy all important documents and store them in a safe place. These include identity cards, healthcare and social insurance or security cards, driver's license and registration, credit cards, bank cards, other personal identification papers including picture IDs, birth certificate, immunization cards for the children, custody orders, personal checkbook, last banking statements, and mortgage papers. Make a list of all computer passwords and access codes, for instance, ATM pins. When you leave the house, take with you these copied documents, as well as the following personal items: prescribed medication, personal hygiene products, glasses and contact lenses, money. Borrow money from family members, a neighbor, a colleague, or friends if you have to. Take with you several changes of clothing. Don't forget nightwear and underwear, heirlooms, jewelry, photo albums, pictures that you want to keep, craft, needlework, and hobby work. The situation is inevitably more complicated if you are fleeing with your children. In this case, be sure to bring with you their various medications, soother, bottles, favorite toy or blanket, and clothing, again, nightwear, underwear. Older kids may carry their own clothes and school books. Make a list of the following and have it on you at all times: addresses and phone numbers of domestic violence shelters, police stations, night courts, community social services, schools in the vicinity, major media, and address and phone and fax numbers of your lawyer and his attorneys. Secure a detailed public transportation map. Your best bet is to apply to a shelter for a safe place to stay the first few days and nights. See a separate video that I've prepared about domestic violence shelters. If you can afford to, your next step should be to hire a divorce attorney and file for interim custody. Your divorce papers can be served much later. Your first concern is to keep the children with you safely and legally. Your husband is likely to claim that you have kidnapped them. But your escape should be only the tip of a long period of meticulous preparations. We already mentioned that you should make copies of all important documents. Don't escape from your predicament penniless. Secretly put aside cash for an escape fund. Your husband is likely to block your checking account and your credit cards. Ask around where you can stay the first week. Will your family or friends accept you? Apply to a domestic violence shelter and wait to be accepted before you get away. Be sure to know where you are going that first night. Make extra sets of keys and documents. Bundle these up with some clothes and keep these reserved troves with friends and family. Put one such treasure in a safety deposit box and give the key to someone you trust. Secure transportation for the day or night of the escape. Agree on codes and signals with friends and family. For instance, if I don't call you by 10 p.m., something has gone wrong, or if I call you and say that Ron is home, call the police. You should wait until he is gone and only then leave home. Avoid confrontation over your departure. It can end badly. Do not inform him of your plans. Make excuses to slip away in the days and months before you actually leave. Get him used to your frequent absence. Should you get the police involved, watch the next video for an answer. I'm Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. You're a victim of abuse. You are being abused repeatedly and frequently. Should you get the courts involved in your situation? If you want the nightmare to end, there is a rule of thumb which requires courage and determination to implement. Involve the courts whenever possible. In many countries, the first step is to obtain a restraining order from a civil court as part of your divorce or custody proceedings, or as a standalone measure. In some countries, the police apply to the court for an emergency protection order on your behalf. The difference between a protection order and a restraining order is that the protection order is obtained following an incident of domestic violence involving injury or damage to property. It is available immediately. It is granted at the police's request, and it is issued even outside court hours. Many restraining orders are granted ex parte, without the knowledge or presence of your abusive partner, based solely on a signed and sworn affidavit submitted by you. A typical emergency restraining order forbids the offender from visiting certain locations, such as the children's school, your workplace, or your home. It is later reviewed. At the review, you should produce evidence of the abuse and witnesses. If the emergency or temporary order is upheld, it is fixed for a period of time at the judge's discretion. Always carry the restraining order with you and leave copies of the order at your place of employment and at your children's daycare and schools. You will have to show the restraining order to the police if you want to get your abuser arrested when he violates its terms. Breach of a restraining order is a criminal offense. The wording of the restraining order is not uniform, and it is crucial. The police shall arrest is not the same as the police may arrest the offender. So make sure that your restraining order is phrased properly. The police shall arrest the offender if he ignores the conditions set forth in the order. Don't forget to ask the court to forbid your abuser to contact you by phone and other electronic means. Seek a new restraining order if you had moved and your place of residence or your workplace or the children's daycare or schools have changed. If the abuser has visitation rights with the children, these should be specified in the restraining order. Include a provision in the order allowing you to deny the visit if he is intoxicated. The order can be issued against your abuser's family and friends as well, especially if they harass and stop you. A restraining order is no substitute for taking precautionary measures to safeguard yourself and your children. Abusers often ignore the court's strictures. They taunt you all the same. They find ways. The situation can easily escalate and get out of hand. Be prepared for such unpleasant and dangerous eventualities. Avoid empty and unlit areas. Carry relevant emergency numbers with you at all times. Install a personalized alarm system. Wear comfortable shoes and clothes to allow you to run if you're attacked. Trust your senses. If you feel that you are being followed, go to a public place, restaurant, department store, cinema. Learn by rote the transit routes of all public transport around your home and workplace, and make special arrangements with a cab operator nearest to you. You may also wish to consider buying a weapon, or at least a mace spray can. If you were physically or sexually assaulted, or if you are being stalked or harassed, keep records of all the incidents and lists of witnesses. Never hesitate to lay charges against your abuser, his family and friends. See your charges through by testifying against the offenders. Try not to withdraw the charges, even if you worked out your problems, even if you are afraid. Abusers learn the hard way, and a spell in jail or even a fine is likely to guarantee your future safety. Based on a criminal police file, the criminal court can also force your abuser and his family and friends, if they have been harassing you, to sign a peace bond in the presence of a judge. A peace bond is a pledge of good behavior, often requiring your abuser to stay away from your home and place of work for a period of anywhere between 3 and 12 months. Some peace bonds forbid the abuser from carrying weapons. Have the peace bond with you at all times. Leave copies of the peace bond at your children's daycare and school centers, and at your place of employment. You will have to show the peace bond to the police if you want to get your abuser arrested when he violates the terms of the peace bond. Breach of a peace bond is a criminal offense. Do not meet your abuser or speak to him while the restraining order or the peace bond are in effect. The courts are likely to take a very dim view of the fact that you yourself have violated the terms of these instruments of law issued for your protection and at your request. There are many additional remedies the courts can and do provide and apply. They can force your abusive partner to surrender to you household items and clothing, to grant you access to bank accounts and credit cards, to defray some costs, to pay alimony and child support, to submit to psychological counseling and evaluation, and to grant the police access to his home and workplace at all times. Consult your family or divorce attorney as to what can and is desirable to be done. In theory, the courts are the victim's friends. The truth, however, is a lot more nuanced. If you are not represented, your chances to get protection and prevail, in other words, to have your day in court, they are very slim. The courts also show some institutional bias in favor of the abuser. I discussed this elsewhere in another video. Yet, despite these hurdles, there is no substitute to getting the legal system to weigh in and restrain your abuser. Use the legal system wisely, and you will not regret it. I deal with two particular court-related situations, custody and giving testimony, in two separate videos. Be sure to watch the entire series. It contains well over 40 videos and will be released in the next few weeks. I wish you luck. I'm Sam Vaknin, and I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. You're being abused frequently and repeatedly. Should you get the police involved? If you want the nightmare to end, there is a rule of thumb which requires courage and determination to implement. Involve the police and law enforcement authorities whenever possible. Report his crimes as soon as you can. Make sure that you retain a copy of your complaint. Your abuser counts on your fear of him and on your natural propensity to keep domestic problems a secret. Expose him to scrutiny and to the penalties of the law. This will make him reconsider his actions next time around. Physical assault is a criminal offense, and so is rape, and in some countries, stalking and marital rape. If you have been physically or sexually assaulted, go to the nearest hospital and document your injuries. Be sure to obtain copies of the admission form, the medical evaluation report, and of any photographs and exam results, X-rays, computerized tomography, biopsies, MRIs, and so on. If your abusive, intimate partner verbally threatens you, your nearest and dearest, or your property, or even pets, this is also criminal conduct. To the best of your ability, get him on tape, or make him repeat his threats in the presence of witnesses. Then, promptly, file a complaint with the police. If your abuser forces you to remain indoors in isolation, he is committing an offense. Forced confinement or imprisonment is illegal. While so incarcerated, failing to provide you with vital necessities such as air, water, medical aid, and food is yet another criminal act. Damage to property, rendering it inoperative or useless, is mischief. It is punishable by law. Same goes for cruelty to animals, let alone children. If your partner swindled you out of funds, or committed fraud, theft, or perjury by falsifying your signature on a checking or credit card account, and so on, report him to the police. Financial abuse is as pernicious as the physical variety. In most countries, the police must respond to your complaint. They cannot just file it away or suppress it. They must talk to you and to your partner separately and obtain written and signed statements from both parties. The police officer on the scene must inform you of your legal options and rights. The officer in charge must also furnish you with a list of domestic violence shelters and other forms of help available in your community. If you suspect that a member of your family is being abused, the police in most countries can obtain a warrant permitting entry into the premises to inspect the situation. They are also authorized to help the victim relocate, leave, and to assist her in any way, including by applying on her behalf and with her consent to the courts to obtain restraining and emergency protection orders. A breach of either of these kind of orders may be an indictable criminal offense, as well as a civil offense. If you decide to pursue the matter, and if there are reasonable grounds to do so, the police will likely lay charges against the offender and accuse your partner of assault. Actually, your consent is only a matter of formality and is not strictly required by law. The police can charge an offender on the basis of evidence only and without your consent. If the team on the scene refuses to lay charges, you have the right to talk to the senior police officer. If you cannot sway them to act, you can lay charges yourself by going to the courthouse and filing with the Justice of the Peace. The Justice of the Peace must let you lay charges. It is your inalienable right. He cannot deny it to you. You cannot withdraw charges laid by the police, and you most probably will be subpoenaed to testify against your abuser. So, should you get the courts involved? Watch the next video for the answers.